No, I flew in that.
Any on here?
I was up north.
Behind you there.
Let's call to order the Finance Committee meeting of December 14th.
That's it.
Let's welcome, I'm going to welcome everybody here.
Yes.
Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy New Year to you all. Let's introduce ourselves, starting over here at the end. Let's see who that is.
Start with you.
Oh, yeah, Bill, go ahead, introduce yourself.
Oh, I had to
Yeah,
check my ID. Bill McDaniel.
He's when you're retired, I guess.
Mike Burke, CFO.
Paul Dumars, Finance Committee.
George Elmore, Finance Committee.
Rick Miller, Finance Committee.
Bill Moore, Finance Committee.
Jason Heumann, PFM Asset Management.
Good morning. Stephen Alexander, PFM.
Leanne Evans, Treasurer.
David Moore, PFM.
Ron Haran, Treasury.
Jack Warner, Finance Committee.
Stephanie Fitzwilliam, Treasury.
Loretta McIntyre, Treasury.
Claire Littlejohn, Office of General Counsel.
And our guest?
Rick Patterson, Raymond James. Mike Baldwin, Citigroup. Mike Olive, Wells Fargo. Daniel, Wells Fargo. Matt Williams, Bank of America Merrill Lynch. Doug Draper, Bank of America Merrill Lynch. Morgan Stanley.
Hey, welcome.
We have some more over here.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Anton Gwyneth with Siebert, Narrow Shank.
You can join the crowd if you like.
Who is he?
Okay, so the first order of business is approval of the agenda. Your motion?
So move.
Second.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Approval of the minutes of October 26th. Any comments on them?
Yes.
Bill?
Move to approve them.
The minutes, okay. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Public comments. So anybody have a comment in the public? None seen. Our discussion items, the annual debt report. I guess that's Steve. Is that Steve? Or is
No, that could be.
This was me.
That's you, sorry.
So I'll be
Yeah.
going. I'd like to start first by thanking all of you for coming. We always have the meeting in December to cover any annual reports we haven't done yet and policies, which we're going to get to after this. But also we start with a breakfast just to thank everyone for all their assistance over the course of the year. From our committee members to all the advisors and underwriters. It's a team effort to get all this stuff, and my team as well, who I think they ate this morning, and we may eat again because it looks like there's quite a bit of leftovers. It does take a big team to get all the work done that we do. So thank you on behalf of myself, but also from the school board and the district. So we appreciate all the help you give us. So the annual debt report is required by debt policy. Now, our debt management policy technically requires the spreadsheet that's at the end. And it's just grown into something that's much bigger than that. Every year I add something else to it, and this year is no exception. I've added a couple of little charts in here that I think are helpful. So we start off by just general debt, what we do, mentioned all the Finance Committee members, and we thank you. And I'm going to get to the chart back behind it, but we do talk about the present value savings that we've achieved since 2001. It's up to $162 million. So I need to thank all of you for all the work that you've put into this and contributed to that huge number. I've also added the team that works with us. So we had all the advisors. I've added the underwriting team this year, so they're all mentioned as well. And there is a link to our investors relations page. At this point, I do want to mention the district is doing a new website that will be opened up next week, I believe. So I'll have to send you new links, most likely, for the Finance Committee page and for investor relations. It is going to look a little different, but we'll be sending those out to you as soon as it's up and running. So we start off, and I'm not going to read all through this. This page actually hasn't changed since last year. It's a history of the debt issuance. And I put this in here because from time to time we do get questions. Why do we have such a large debt service payment in our capital budget? How did we get to this point? So we really go through and show the number of student stations that have been built and the history of debt, of all of our debt issues. We've dramatically reduced the safety inspection violations because we've replaced so many schools. We dealt with class size reductions. We're actually tracking the number of students that are housed in schools that we have funded with COPS. So that's 102,000 students out of our 190,000 students. So over half of our students are sitting in schools that we financed. So that's good news. I do give an update on the sales tax that was approved, and then I get into the reduction of taxing authority. And this chart you all have seen before. I'm never going to let this go because I think it's important. The red line is where we were in 2008, the value of the millage in 2008. The green line is the value of the two mills, and you remember that the legislature reduced it to 1.5 mills. So in 2016, we would have recovered from the slump in the housing market. Because we're to 1.5 mills, we're not going to get to the same level of millage revenues until we get to 2022. So that's a big difference. That's one of the reasons why we really needed the sales tax, so that we could catch up on maintenance that was deferred because of that change. So I start here with the amount of COPS outstanding. It's $1.35 billion, and this chart is something that we added in this year. It really shows the amount of principal outstanding. And I start at 2008, which is the high point, and you can see how much we've paid off and how much we've reduced it. That's both through just normal maturities, but also when we do some refinancing, a lot of times we're able to reduce the par or move up maturity payments so that we're able to shrink that. And that tells a good story as well. We've had comments come in that have said that when we refinance, we're actually moving out the maturity, and we've never done that. The maturities are always the same or even shorter when we do a refinancing. So at this point, roughly 49% of our total student stations were financed, 45% of our total square footage of schools were financed. Currently, there's about 39% of student stations in the master lease because some of the debt has been completely paid off. And then we talk about some of the challenges that we're facing, and one is requiring that dollars be shared with charter schools. And I updated that because the law changed a little bit this year. The legislature did fully fund charter schools for this year, so none of our capital dollars went to charter schools. There's no way to know if that's going to happen in future years, so it's something we continue to watch for. And our capital budget actually has money set aside for charter schools every year. We're always hopeful the legislature will fully fund it, and then we can take that money and use it for other things. So looking ahead, this is our borrowing capacity. The gray bars is our existing debt, and the blue is the debt we're planning to issue. And then the lines, the green line is half of 2 mills, which at some point I'm probably going to have to break down and take that line off, but that's where I wish we were. The blue line is half of 1.5 mills, so we're right at that edge. And the red line is where we think it would be if we have to share money with charter schools. So this number looks better than it did because the law changed a little bit, but that's something we continue to monitor.
Can I chime in?
Yeah.
No. On the prior page, Leanne made the point about reducing principal amount over time. When you look on this next page, you see the bulk of the debt is paid down in the next 10 years. And so, again, that's one of the reasons the sales tax is so important, because it helps bridge the gap until the debt service decreases. I mean, literally goes from over $150 million down to 30 or 40, depending on which year you're looking at right there. Yeah.
So we have lots of capacity to borrow in the future. Very tight right now, but we do have, and even with the new money that we're planning to borrow, it still fits within that threshold of half of the 1.5 mills. And I do make the comment, with the assistance of the Finance Committee, we continue to look for opportunities to reduce borrowing costs, and that's one of the reasons why you all are here, and you review all of our pending debt issues when you do them. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on each of these. We do this every year, but this is all the outstanding debt. So capital outlay bond issue, we haven't done any of these since, I believe, 2010 was the last one. So this is debt that's issued by the state on our behalf. Our current governor is very opposed to issuing debt. They haven't done this in a long time. So it's just showing the principal payments and what's outstanding. So as of the next principal payment will happen on January 1, $1.3 million. There's only $9.8 million outstanding of these bonds. For leases, we had 3 outstanding. We did 4 outstanding. We just did our 4th one in October. So it's a subsequent event, but it's been done, so I've included it. That was the lease for chillers at 42 of our schools. So it was a $16 million lease. The coupon rate was 3.1. It matures in 5 years, so in 2023. Certificates of participation, you know what these are, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. And we've done 2 presentations to you on the debt issues that we did. But this is a document we'll go back to from, so I've listed the transactions, 2017 A, B, 2018 A, B, and C. So for each one of these, we indicated that it was negotiated or done as a competitive sale, the par amount, who the senior managers were, the other underwriters involved in each transaction, they refunded the previous debt, and then what it refunded. So it was the termination of the swaps and also the old debt. And it talks about the amount of savings or the cost. And with some of these that are terminating swaps, we did have a small cost. So I've acknowledged those coupon rates, interest rates, when it closed, and when the final maturity. So we've done that on each transaction. And then I jump into the Qualified Zone Academy bonds, which there are still 2 outstanding. There's not very much left. $617,000 is what's left to be paid. I think it's 2 more years and these will be done. Final maturity is 2021. The Qualified School Construction bonds, I did add some information in this about sequestration. We hadn't addressed that in the past, so I wanted to cover that. When we did this debt issue, it was done as a taxable bond with a subsidy coming from the Treasury Department that covered the difference between the taxable and tax-exempt rate. And due to budget shortfalls of the federal government, they've reduced that subsidy. So the total value of that subsidy so far, it's an additional cost of $1.3 million, and we're projecting it's going to be another $3 million. It'll be $3 million over the life of the transaction. The rate of the subsidy reduction changes every year. It started off at 8.7%. It's a little less than that now. So it's something that transaction still was very valuable. The net interest cost is very, very low, but it's not as good as it once was. Tax anticipation notes, as you know, we just did one in September, so we have the information on the one that recently matured in August as well as the new one. And it will mature in August of 2019. And hedges, this section is going to change a lot next year because there are no hedges left. But for the report this year, what I did was go ahead and I mentioned that they were terminated, the total cost of the termination. And I've left each swap diagram here and indicated the termination and the specifics of the termination. So when we get to next year, you'll probably just have this page to say this is what swaps are, and we have none outstanding. Unless something dramatic happens next year and we end up doing a swap, I don't foresee that happening. But we do have the slide for each one that explains how it was terminated and the costs associated with it.
Can I add?
Yep.
I know over the years I'll try to add some holiday levity. I'm expecting Mr. Moore down there, the other Mr. Moore, to jump up and do a cartwheel right now because he has appropriately been pushing and pushing to deal with the swaps. And thank you for collectively y'all's patience because as you remember, to get out of the swaps at some different points in time would have been extremely expensive, tens of millions of dollars. And you all helped us evaluate what we should do at each step of the way and waited till we got everything aligned so we could get out of them for essentially nothing so that the net savings was still material for the swap. So thanks for your patience and diligence and all the above, and Yahoo, done.
Yeah. The swaps I do have in here, I have the
Yahoo
the
is a
total
financial
cost,
term.
The net cost of the transactions. The swaps alone produce savings of over $40 million. It's $40.58 million. So we have that information in here. And there's a chart at the back that summarizes all 6 of the swaps that we've done. I think in hindsight, they were well worth it. We saved a lot of money from them. But the market has changed, and it was time to step away from them. At this point, we have no hedges and we have no variable rate debt. Everything is fixed out until maturity. It's as safe of a debt portfolio as you can get. Okay, so then I go through the credit ratings. They have not changed. They're the same. I've talked with Moody's and Fitch, and both of them have indicated the passing of the sales tax and The recent referendum for operations is very much a credit positive. I don't know if we can consider pushing for an upgrade. There are several districts that are one step higher than us, and I've looked at the difference, and it looks like the only difference between us and those other districts is they had an operating millage levy, and now we do as well. But I think they're also looking at what's coming from the state and the challenges we're going to have on funding going forward. So I don't know that that's something we can look at. I mean, I will look at it, but I don't know that it's going to be successful. So, and I probably also need to send out, there was a report that came out from Fitch back in June. I didn't get it until recently, but it has a really good summary of Florida school districts. And I'll be happy to send that to you after the meeting.
Good.
So the rating definitions, and these are the charts that the various reports that we include. This is a list, and I know the legal department uses this quite frequently, as do I. This lists all the transactions that were funded. So for these first few, we fully paid them off. But for example, the 2000A, it was originally done as 2000A. The most recent was 2014B. It shows how much is still is outstanding as of August 1st of this year, but it lists each individual project that was financed. And this is important for us to keep track of, because if we want to put an addition at the school and it's already fully encumbered with and part of the master lease, we have to track that. And so this is a good tool that we use on a regular basis. So it lists all the schools that were financed with the COPS. And then the next chart is, I call that the Finance Committee chart. It lists every transaction that we've done, whether it's a new money, it's a refunding, if there was a swap, the transaction total, the present value savings, and I have a count over at the end just to keep track of the volume. Has the commercial paper from the old sales tax, GO bonds, leases, revenue anticipation notes, which we did a few years ago, the swaps. So for each one, you can see the savings that have been accumulated. So with COPS refundings, the savings have been $108 million. With swaps, there's the $40 million number. The total savings that we've talked about, $162 million, 78 transactions that this committee has reviewed. So kudos to all of you for the work that you've done with this. So again, that's my Finance Committee report. And then the last one, and this is why we give it to you as a hard copy, because there's no way to get this all on the screen, but I'll kind of run across the top. This is the report that is actually required for the annual debt report. So it lists the series, the issue date, the senior manager or provider, the original amount outstanding, principal outstanding as of June 30th, which is our year-end numbers, but we make principal payments on August 1st, so I like to include that as well. Final maturity, if it's fixed or variable, and at this point everything is fixed. The interest rates, the insurer or credit enhancement. At this point, we have no bond insurance. The bond insurer's credit ratings are less than ours, so we've taken all the bond insurance off. We have the insurer rating if it applied, which it doesn't, so it also is unenhanced. The underlying district credit rating, or the rating for the issuer. So if there's a rating, it has it's Moody's, S&P, and Fitch. The district rating for COPS, which is one step lower. Any call provisions, the purpose of it, so if it was a new money or if it refunded a transaction or was later refunded by a transaction, we track that here. Market exposure, which right now all of them are none. Hedges are all blank. And the yield contribution, we're actually working with another arm of PFM to update these. At this point, they're all NA. I realize I've got numbers here, and this is not correct. These should all be NA. We've reached the 5-year window for all of them. We do, and if you recall a few years ago, back in 2007, so it's not even a few years ago now, 2007, 2008, there was an issue that we had not tracked. It was a refunding of a transaction that was less than a year old. We missed the arbitrage calculation and had to pay a fine to the IRS. We made sure that we can't miss that again. We now have PFM do an annual review of all of our arbitrage requirements, and that gets sent into our external auditors and the Auditor General. So it's just a check and balance way to make sure I can never miss that again, that we're reviewing that annually. There's no arbitrage liability on any of these. So we go through that for all of the COPS, any other transactions like the equipment leases, the TANs, the state bonds, the COBE bonds. And then the last page is the list of the hedges. And all of them, there is no mark-to-market on any of them anymore. But this is the summary of all 6 of the swaps. And it does come up, and it shows that number I mentioned, the $40 million of savings that we've had on the 6 swaps. And I believe that is the last page. Oh, there's one more page. Let me shrink this one down. This is the graphical representation of all of our transactions. And I keep this hanging on the wall, as does our accounting manager. It's very helpful when we're doing financials or doing reports. It will show the original transaction, and you can follow the colored line up to the transaction that refunded it. So it's a graphical history of them. So when we want to know which transaction funded which, we can follow the lines, and they're all color-coded and have the maturities on them. So this is another working document.
It used to fit on an 8.5 by 11, now it's...
It's 11 by 17 now. Yeah.
True.
I was worried when I first saw it that Leanne was going the way of Russell Crowe in A Beautiful Mind. He's got the red lines all over the office.
He's got the string.
But then she calmed me down when I understood what it was.
It even scared Russell Crowe.
So that is the annual debt report. We'll be sending this along with the annual investment report out to the board next week with a note out to them. We're required to send it to them every year, so we'll send that out. But a lot of good work was done this year, and we appreciate all your assistance in getting that accomplished. Do you have any questions on that, on the debt report?
Well done.
Okay.
Very well done.
Thank you much.
So our next item is a review of
Policies.
And the
Okay, and
first
what
one's
I've
the
done,
debt
and we have hard copies of all the, we gave you hard copies of everything today. I think when you're doing policies, it's helpful to have it in writing in front of you. What I propose doing is I have a presentation that summarizes the changes that we're doing in debt. And I want to focus in on actually, I'm not sure if we even need to pull them up. What I want to do is go through what the changes are. You have the hard copies, and we can circle back at the meeting in February. I know a number of you have some deadlines and need to leave at 9:30, so I want to make sure we're cognizant of that. So instead of going through line by line of every change, I'm going to leave them with you, but go through a summary of the changes that we're making. So for the scope of the policy for debt, it really just goes through the type of debt that's allowed. It gives the measures of debt levels, limits, selection of sales, how we would do hedges, and compliance and reporting requirements. The changes we're doing, a lot of it is just wordsmithing. We've eliminated some duplicative language. We've got some minor language changes to make it easier to understand. The real changes are in the section on swaps, because we didn't have the language in the policy when we did the swaps, and we add the language after the fact. So the language had to line up with the swaps we had outstanding. So we've made some slight changes to it. We don't have any swaps, so we wanted to start fresh with that language. There's not a lot of changes to it, but I think they're important to go ahead and make those changes. We've also updated some language regarding bond insurance, since in most cases, and actually in all cases, we have a better credit rating than they do, so we wanted to leave it out there as an option, but it's not a requirement. And the way the language was written, it didn't say you had to have it, but it didn't really imply that you had options. So we changed that and updated the credit ratings. So there's not a lot of changes there. I can bring it up. We have it here. Let's see. Debt management.
Just while she's doing that, just to give you a sense of some of the things, like this first page is a good example. Instead of specifically referencing the one kind of federally subsidized bonds that were available back then, we changed it to just say federally subsidized bonds, because there were multiple types available now. So the bulk of the changes are things like that, where it's just the market has evolved and so forth.
Right.
Did we point out anything about the learning we've had in federally subsidized bonds? I don't do it.
We left this at the 10,000-foot level.
Okay.
but
That's something that we all know, and I did kind of hint at it with the annual debt report and put that in the document, and it will stay as long as those are outstanding, and talk about the subsidy and sequestration. So I don't think we're ever going to forget that. We're dealing with it every year.
Yeah, the policy might reflect it in some fashion, just a note of caution.
Well, there's a lot of some of the changes include full assessment of risk and consequences and so forth. So there's some phrasing like that was intentionally added for that reason, because it applies to anything other than pure fixed rate debt.
So you have a copy of this. I'll get to the point. I want to get to the section where we specifically talk about hedges and, yeah,
15, I
it's
think.
coming. Credit enhancements, we said, or if it's required by type of financing, but we would evaluate whenever we do a debt to see if it will save us money or it's required by the type of financing. That's when we would do bond insurance.
Can you go back there?
There's an if
It's
missing.
if there's savings in terms of reduced
Oh, it should be
interest.
or if?
Exceeds the cost of the credit enhancement.
Thank
Well, I think you've got to have something there on risk, because credit enhancements carry sometimes a risk, and that the benefits got to outweigh it substantially.
And whoever typed this, then that would be me, missed the if after or, I think.
Or if it is, yeah.
Or if it is required. Sorry about that.
And I didn't catch it when I read it. Okay.
The pronoun
We'll
it
update that.
refers to,
The bond insurance.
The credit enhancement that's just prior to the it, is that, I did not get A's in English.
no, so it is
Yeah,
credit
yes.
Math.
enhancement.
For clarity, yes, and math. Sorry?
It is credit enhancement.
Right. I'll adjust the language there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Just take the word in and replace it with
Okay.
Yeah. I
But
brought
on
the
that,
PDF version.
I would put something, I caution on that.
Okay,
Okay.
and I made a note of that as well. So this is the section on swaps and interest rate hedges. We talked about, instead of just savings, it's net interest cost savings, and the savings should be material and fully consider the risk of the obligation
Yeah, there you go.
compared to traditional financing. We added in basis swaps as an example of the type of transactions we could have. We took out the example here of a swaption. It just to achieve more flexibility and overall financial objectives. So it's just slight changes. And mention that we can add to the team if needed to make sure we have a large enough pool of candidates when we're looking at swaps. I think the one I'm looking for, when we talk about the counterparties, I think we had, it's in the guidelines.
Yes.
That's in the guidelines. So the policy, I think the language is pretty, the changes aren't truly significant, but we do need to make the changes. We also have changes to the guidelines and procedures. So for the guidelines, and the guidelines are something that can be changed by the Finance Committee. They don't have to go to the school board. So we did add language in that document specifically regarding counterparties for swaps. Talked about budgeting for debt service and added some things in there that we do, but we needed to add that in. But we get to the section on counterparties. So we've changed it. They have to have at least 2 nationally read ratings of A1 or A+ or higher. And there's also a section, the counterparty exposure no more than the greater 100 million or 35% of the total principal. So we've added some things in there to make sure that we have diversification in our counterparties if we do swaps in the future.
And at the whole point of that phrase is to make sure that if you're just doing one small swap, you don't have to go divide it into three pieces or something like that. So it was to go both ways.
Right. So the guidelines, just a few changes there. Where we have a little bit more change is in the procedures. There is an upcoming change to 15C212 that adds 2 new events requiring disclosure. So if there's another financial obligation, and it used to be just outstanding debt. Now, if it's a lease or a private placement, a lot more transactions have to be disclosed. And they've also adjusted some language here and added in a voluntary filing of preliminary offering statement. So the procedures have been updated to reflect that as well. The language for that actually came from our Disclosure Council. We wanted to make sure we had that covered. So what I'd like to do with these, I'm going to leave these with you, and then we'll come back to them in February. And if you have any changes at all or suggested changes, if you could let me know, we'll go through them briefly again. Any other changes that you all have recommended, we can bring them back in February.
Let me ask you on the changes for 15C through 12. Have you done a spreadsheet now? I know you have that chart that shows all your debt. But does that debt include things like leases and things like that?
Yes.
That will now be required to be reported?
We have to report on any new ones as of the date in February.
Well, you also have to look back and see if you've had any
Right.
problems with any of those.
Right.
And so you're going to need a chart that covers the whole.
Right, we have all the private placements, any privately offered debt is already out and loaded. The leases have not been, we're working to have that done by the date in February.
Yeah.
So I heard from Disclosure Council, there's no need to do it. And my comment back to him is, well, I'd rather be on the safe side and go ahead and load them all. So we're working with him to figure out exactly what documents should be loaded,
Yeah.
because there's not an official statement associated
Right.
with the leases.
Yeah, this is a hard call because the accountants are weighing into what is a financing lease. In fact, they've gotten rid of the notion altogether.
Right.
Right,
So
Right.
what it is for the SEC is a different question.
right.
And
Well,
it's actually, it should be the same question. So you're going to need input from your accountant.
Yeah, one of the challenges, when the language first came out from the SEC, they were including anything, so an operating lease of a Pitney Bowes postage reader was going to require disclosure. Leases for copy machines was going to require disclosure. They came back and took that out and said it's really anything that's going towards borrowing money. You know, so they narrowed that down. So it will be just the 5 equipment leases, and one of them is being paid off in January or February 1st. So it'll be down to 4. So those 4 are the things that we'll need to add in. I think everything else is already filed on Emma.
That includes school buses and things like that?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, that's the leases that we've done for
Right.
buses,
Yeah,
buses and other vehicles.
Yeah, that equipment is big equipment, not copiers and things.
Yeah, it's when we bought there's 4 of them, and 3 were done. There were originally 5. 3 were done for school buses, and 2 were done for air conditioning equipment. So the last one was $16 million. So each of those we are going to file. The question really at this point is what to file, and it may be a summary document. I'm working with Disclosure Council on
You can
what.
throw the whole thing in and not worry about the summary.
Well, and we've thought about doing that as well. We're just working through what should be filed, and I want to make sure it's appropriate. So I have until, there's a date in February, I'm just shooting for February 1 to have it done. So we've updated the procedures to include
Okay.
that. Let's see.
Maybe you can explain a little bit about the background on that, David. Why?
Yeah, the big driver for that change is that over the last decade, a lot of financings have been done with banks as private placements, so they weren't originally subject to all the disclosures. And for good reason, investors wanted to know, if you've got a $200 or $300 million bank loan outstanding, and it might have a provision for acceleration in the event of a default. That's a big issue for other investors. And so the rule is intended to capture, and I think the right word is, any other material financial obligations of an issuer, so that if you missed a payment on a copier lease, that's not material. If you miss a payment on a $300 million bank loan, that's material. And if the consequences of missing are significant, that's material. And the whole point was to capture all the other things that an issuer might be financing. And I think they really leave it to the issuer to really assess the materiality side of it. And so it would vary materially, shouldn't use that word. It would vary from issuer to issuer. A small city, $1 million lease may be material. For the district, probably not.
Well, the concept is that there is a public disclosure vehicle called Emma that is an online system, and only public deals only your public transactions that were traded publicly had to be shown on this system. And now direct private placements or bank loans, as well as other things that are material, like a big lease that's a financing lease, will now have to be shown on this system so that all investors will know what your financial.
Right. Well, it's interesting
Material.
when you talk about material, and we had a training session a couple of weeks ago. We actually had our Disclosure Council come in and do a presentation to go over everything. I've got some new folks in my office that hadn't heard all this before, and I included Blair from legal, and we were all there, and he went through all the requirements, and we asked questions. It was a good discussion. And we actually were going back and forth. He doesn't think we really need to put the leases out there because it's not material in terms of our whole capital program. I'm leaning towards doing it anyways. I'd rather err on the side of caution. The SEC could change the way they interpret the rules, so I'm just leaning towards putting it out there. It doesn't hurt anything to have it there.
How big are they?
The largest one is the one we just did that was 16 million, and it's over 5 years. But he's looking at our total capital plan and the total debt service for all of our COPs. It's a very small amount. He said it's really not material in the scheme of things. But I'm leaning towards putting it out there anyways.
Yeah,
It doesn't hurt to put more out there.
Well, if it has provisions like cross defaults with other debt, it might be material.
I don't think it does. We took all that. That's not there. So
That's, and that question is why they want as much disclosed as is deemed appropriate, is if a relatively small, maybe a $30 or $40 million financing for the district, which is pretty small, if it had a cross default into the COPS master lease, that would be material to an investor out there. So that's why every issuer has to really look at their facts and circumstances and talk to disclosure counsel and so forth to figure out exactly what's the right thing to disclose.
Okay.
So this is, that's the big change to the procedures. And I just wanted to make sure the group has seen, this is our debt compliance procedures, and it's really related to post-issuance, and we name all the different groups that we use, and it goes through exactly what we're supposed to do. So we have detailed procedures, and these are available online. I'm not sure if they're going to be on the new website or not. I'm still working on what's on the new website. But we're going to make sure these are readily available. And one of the things that I haven't done yet but will be doing is sending a copy of this out to all the underwriters to let them review it as well. Because I like to get as much feedback on these as possible. So we'll send it around. It's already gone through our advisors and our attorneys. So before I bring it back in February, we'll go through and make sure the underwriters have seen it, and you will have a chance to review it as well. So that covers all of the items related to debt. So now we're going to turn over to the investment side. And we have a couple of changes, but there's 2 new classes of investments that PFM has suggested that we add into our policy. So I'm going to let Steve go through, and they've got a presentation to explain what they are. And I just wanted to get feedback from the committee as well to get before we codify and put this in a policy for the board.
All right, good morning.
Take it.
Yes, thank you. Two potential additions to the investment policy that's in the red line, a little presentation. I'm sure you've heard of these securities before, supernationals and asset-backed securities. These are 2 asset classes that we have been adding for the last couple of years to public funds investment policies. Really the reason behind the supernationals are simply because Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac had been declining in the amount of issuance. They originally started reducing the amount of debt issuance year over year by 10% under the U.S. Treasury pressure, basically. They're up to 15%. So the amount of debt available to buy in the marketplace, bonds to buy from both Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, are on a big decline, and they have been for several years. So this is a high-quality, AAA-rated securities. In fact, it's the only agencies that were not downgraded by S&P. They're still AAA. Very solid credit. And when you look at the balance sheet and the information from these banks, in most cases, these banks have better credit quality than most American banks do because of their lending practices. So we're using them to help replace those agency securities that we used to buy that was available in the marketplace. So the investment policy, of course, would have restrictions. I think it's set at 25% max and then 5% per issuer. So we have some limitations on those. But we wanted to bring this forward to you. We think it makes sense to expand the investment policy to include these agencies. And you'll see on the next page a little bit more detail about the ones that we are utilizing for our clients. Probably the best example, the one you probably are most familiar with, is something like the World Bank. And we're only buying bonds that the U.S. is a major shareholder in, and so we feel that gives a strength to it. Basically, the top 3 there listed are the most popular ones that we are purchasing through our credit committee. They've been around, as you can see. Of course, World Bank was really established after World War II was basically over, and they've been around for many years, as well as the International Finance Corporation, the Inter-American Development Bank, followed in 56 and 59 respectfully.
Are they rated?
Yeah, they're all rated AAA by S&P and Moody's, and they trade about 15 to 16 basis points generally over agencies like a Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. Pardon?
Well, I'd like to get Phil's.
Oh, sure,
No,
sure.
no.
Fire away. There's a lot of information here, so I know we're kind of short on time. So they were enacted by Congress, and you'll see the information there as far as the acts of Congress. So there's lots of provisions there to ensure that the debt is repaid first before anything else is paid, just like any other bonds that other agencies would issue. On the next page, thanks, Leanne. On the next page, you can see the spread over agencies. As you know, of course, agency spread over treasuries have really compressed over the years, really since the credit crisis and since the federal government basically took over both Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Our biggest challenge in the marketplace on a regular basis is just that the issuance level of both Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are down. So we added supernationals to our portfolios from a liquidity standpoint. They're very liquid. The market is not quite as large, of course, as Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, but they are in the marketplace on a regular basis, and we find them to be helpful to add to the portfolio. On the next,
What percentage?
no more than 25% of the portfolio, and then 5% per issuer.
Yeah.
So very strict rules on those as well.
And I see these were created by Congress. Are any provisions in the legislation that would permit executive action that would change their ability to make payments?
No. They are strictly through Congress. That could be good or bad, I guess, but they're acted by Congress. And
Well, the principal backup for these, originally when the World Bank was started, the unfunded or uncalled capital of the United States covered all the debt that they issued. In other words, the U.S. was the largest shareholder, and the capital, the uncalled, we didn't contribute that. We in Britain and so forth didn't contribute that much cash, but we subscribed to capital that could be called if it were required. And so there was a real reason. There was really a very backdoor way of putting the United States on the credit on the hook for for the debt for all the World Bank. And I think that's similar. That gradually eroded over the years, and not a great deal of. I guess the question is, how much of it is covered by uncalled capital from major industrial companies, United States, Japan,
countries,
et cetera. I did some work for the Asian Development Bank, and I'm sure they haven't never defaulted, and I'm sure, hopefully they never will. But it's not because the portfolio of security, the loans that they made are particularly outstanding. Let's put it that way. For example, I worked in Nepal for them for several months, a number of years ago, and the debt, the GDP of Nepal at that point was $2 billion, and the debt that Nepal owed the Asian Development Bank was $2 billion. In other words, they were never going to pay it back, and so you have to. These are not. I'm not saying they're not creditworthy, but they are not. You have to have a certain leap of faith to assume that these people are bulletproof by any means. I mean, it's not. They're not going to. I'm sure it won't default, but it's a more complicated matter than simply the fact that the United States subscribed to each of these things. And, I would be, I'm not wildly enthusiastic about this proposal.
Yeah, me neither, particularly the percentages you're talking about. If you're talking about 5% of the port, 5%.
25%.
They're talking 25, but that
25,
seems to me that's much too high. That's kind of on the par. What do you have for U.S. agencies? 50, 100%, 50%?
That's a good question.
I have it right here. Sorry, there's a chart that I'm getting to that
Yeah.
has them all listed.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Oh, sorry. 50.
50.
50% for GSEs.
Okay, well,
So it's half
seems
of
like
that.
it's awful high for something that, you know, is questionable. Maybe it should be.
Well, you know, maybe not quite, I would say questionable, but I mean, I would rather seek out some more illiquid, U.S. government guaranteed securities if things like that still exist, Title 11 bonds, that sort of thing, whether that kind of stuff still
Yeah, and just,
still
I didn't get a
exists.
chance to know, but we would only focus on those top 3 names that are on that chart. Those are the top 3 that we would be interested in buying, not the ones you mentioned.
Well, still, they still have the same aspects, and that is there's a political aspect that supports that security, presumably, right? Particularly when you're dealing
Yeah.
with
I
territories.
don't mean to be a party
Oh,
pooper.
no,
I'm
no,
just,
no,
I'm
no.
just pointing out that these things are not, this is not Fort Knox here.
Either was Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, so keep that in mind, too.
What's that?
Either was Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah,
quite agree.
yeah.
No, I quite agree.
And none of these agents had any problems during the credit crisis. They
No,
were
I
faced with.
understand. I understand that.
But it is something new.
Yeah.
Well, and this is really why I wanted to bring it to the committee, and rather than just doing the policy, I asked Steve to put this presentation together so we could have a good discussion about it before we take it to the board. So this is not a firm we have to do it, it's an idea, and we wanted to bring it in, and I really do want to get feedback from the committee members before we take it into the board.
Anybody else? Any thoughts?
Yeah, you have to feel comfortable with it, so that's why we're here.
I'm not adverse to having some sort of off-the-run stuff in a minor way. I just think 25% is a lot.
Agree.
Would you have a recommendation of what percent?
Oh, I don't,
5?
5, 10. Start with 5.
You
And
know, see how it works. Yeah.
I think that's
See
reasonable.
what kind of,
what is the typical pickup in yield, say, on a one-year note from the World Bank versus?
It can be anywhere between 16 to 20 basis points.
let's tell them.
Well, how about
About 10 right
compromising
there.
at 10?
Yeah, about 10.
Would you think?
Yeah,
10?
okay.
You want to go with 10%, you said?
Yeah.
Okay. And 5% per issuer.
I would say 10% and monitor it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think it's an excellent idea. The next one
Would we
is-
like to specify the top 3
Yes.
opposed to the whole
We can
whole
add that
package?
in.
We
Definitely
just
could
put
do
it in
that.
writing, the top
Yeah.
3.
I agree. I'd rather have it in writing, and that way it's not up to us to remember that we're only supposed to use those 3.
Yeah, I prefer to have it in writing. I think the more detail we have, the better. Because in our trading platform system, those 3 will be coded in. And that
Okay.
way the trader can't buy anything that's not coded in. So that's good.
Okay. Is there anything on this page that you wanted to go over,
I think
or
we,
just skip on?
we'll just go to the asset
Okay.
backs. As you said, we have to be done by 9:30.
We're shooting for 9:30.
Oh, Bill Moore, would you like to frame a motion?
Oh, well, I'm sorry, excuse me. I was going to propose that we have 10.
Yeah, I don't think you need a motion for this just yet, because what
Oh,
I'm going to
okay.
do is make the change and bring it back to you at the February meeting.
Fair
So this was another reason why I said we're going to bring it back, because I expected some good discussion today. So I'll make the changes. You have a hard copy, so if you see anything else that you spot language-wise or other, you can let me know. I'll factor all that in and bring it back to you in February.
Thank you.
Okay, the next category is asset-backed securities. I'm sure you're familiar with the asset-backed securities. So this would be basically securitize car loans, for instance, Toyota, Honda, Ford. So these are additional ways to diversify our corporate holdings with securities that actually have some assets backed by it. I think the next page probably helps explain it. We would, of course, be buying the highest credit quality possible, so it'll be all A1 paper. So that would be the highest credit quality. And the vast majority of the bonds that we'll be buying would be loans that are securitized and placed into this type of security.
Are we talking car loans here?
Yeah, the next page right here, exactly.
Only car
Yeah.
loans.
So the vast majority are car loans, like I said, like a Honda, Toyota, Ford.
Okay, my question is that we're talking about, we're not talking, your proposal relates to automobile.
Yes,
not
exactly.
Home equity.
Yeah, I just was showing you that, you know,
Yeah,
there's a big
right.
market of asset backs.
Yes,
Right,
indeed.
exactly.
Yeah.
Which ones are we talking about? Only car loans?
Yeah, let me just give you some examples here.
We have some heavy equipment
Yeah,
aspects as
John
well in our
Deere.
portfolios.
So we're trying to expand our interest rate return.
Right, so car loan examples would be like Nissan. This is from a live portfolio. Nissan, Honda, Toyota, and as Jason mentioned, John Deere. These are all be either equipment or car loan asset-backed securities. First tranche and highest credit rating. Excuse me.
Okay, so we're talking not student loans?
No,
Yeah,
no,
okay.
no. Just want to give you other examples of what's out there, but
Right.
we want to stick with the highest credit quality, the most reliable cash flows as far as loan receivables. So we've added these to our portfolios. Oh, thanks, Leon. Yeah, average life of 2, AAA category, at 25% total and 5% per issuer.
Wow. I do have the same concern here. How much greater return do you get on these?
We're looking at about the next slide. Yeah, go to the next slide. No, on the there you go. So you can see the pickup over treasuries. You're looking at about 60 basis points or so. So it's a pretty respectable addition to the
How much?
portfolio.
2 basis?
60 basis.
50 basis.
58, 60 great. You know, I wonder why we're scratching for that kind of return on that kind of investment. I really do. Do we really need it?
It's a good way to add some diversification to the portfolio.
And some
But
risk.
again, it does add risk, and we wanted to bring it in. I really am looking for feedback on this. This isn't something that is a done deal. Steve and I have gone back and forth on it a couple of times, and I wanted to hear what y'all had to say.
I'd like to hear what Paul has to say, who has a portfolio, or our professor as well, who's been
Sure.
in the business.
I mean, asset-backed securities, a lot of people use them. But Rick said, I mean, do we need them? I understand the diversity.
Do you have any in your portfolio?
No.
How's this any different from 2008?
Well, these are actually asset backs that actually have collateral behind. The other ones did not. So these are not in the mortgage industry type securities. So what you're remembering is really all different slices of mortgages as opposed to.
Well, and the assets were houses, which
Exactly.
never go down in value.
Right. That's right. That's right.
And the structure's the same, though. They're taking a bunch of loans, they're splitting them into tranches and then securitizing them.
That's correct. That's correct. Yes. Yes.
It's hard for me to feel good about
Okay.
this.
Okay. Yeah.
I was looking at that last night.
Yeah.
For some reason.
So this instrument has been widely used, and a lot of public agencies are using it. I would feel like we would not be doing service to you if we did not bring this forth to you. So you have to be aware of it
Do you
because
see others doing this?
oh
You
yeah,
see
yeah,
corporate entities or government?
public entities are doing it wherever they can in the country. But again, my purpose is to make sure you're aware of it, you're educated about it, it's in front of you. Because if we didn't bring it to you and you heard it from someplace else, you'll be saying, why we're not doing this? And so
Probably not.
yeah.
every once in a while, I feel like I need to bring you something that's a little edgier, and you can say no.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
I've actually, Steve and I have gone back and forth, and I've kind of shook my head and said, I don't know that we're going to go there, so we'll bring it to the Finance Committee and let
Exactly,
y'all look at it. It's sometimes I'm too conservative with these things. I mean, I've lived through the credit crisis, just with all of you, and I tend to stay on the conservative side. And you know, sometimes it's good to air it and talk about it. And if we
Yeah.
don't want to go there, I'm fine pulling it back out. But I want to have the discussion. It sounds like you all are.
have any
Most of you are shaking your heads no.
Yeah, then let's not do it. You have to feel comfortable with it. So.
Ambivalent about it, maybe. Maybe 2%. Right.
Bill's up to 2%.
Let's do 0.5.
All right, 2.5 then.
No, 0.5.
Okay, so we'll.
Jack's in the category about no,
Yeah.
thank you.
At least there's some collateral. We know that. I mean,
Right, right,
If you're dealing with the African Development Bank or the the Asian Development Bank, you don't know what the hell it. You don't know what
They're
the
not going to get
collateral
paid,
is.
so you know, the backup is what's important there.
Right.
Obviously.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and take out the asset-backed
Take that out, okay.
securities and supranationals. It sounds like you're okay with tipping our toe in the water and put it
10%,
10%
yeah.
and 5.
Okay.
The other change that's in here that I want to
Okay
go
with
ahead and
that?
point out is on. I'm sorry, was there any
No,
other?
no.
Top three, the top three.
The
Top
top
three.
three, yes.
I'm gonna add that
we'll put
language
all-
in.
Yes, absolutely.
The other thing I have here is for intergovernmental pools, we're increasing the total amount that can be invested to 75%, but we're leaving the amount per issuer at 25. That only, it's not important for us today. You know, when we're looking at investing money, how we're spreading it out, we're fine. But when we get towards the end of the year and there's not a lot of money in the bank, when I can only do 50%, that means I've got a lot of money in the bank. So I want to have some options. Now with the pools, I went back and looked at the last committee meeting, and I promised to bring you something in the next finance and investment report, which you will have in February, where I show you the reports we're doing. I think we're going to be able to do the placements, and Steve and I are meeting right after this meeting to finalize the investments for this year. We're not bumping up against that. I'm at 50%. We're not even close to 50%. So, but I think that in the long term, I think it's good to have that option to keep the 25% per issuer. And this year, I am proposing putting some money into the Florida Prime and FEITF. I'm not going to any of the other pools at this point. We're looking at what the composition of each pool is individually and making choices on each one, and we're going to bring that to you in February. But that's the other change that I recommended. That's just giving us another option for short-term money. It's leaving the amount per issuer the same. And if you're not comfortable with that, I can leave it at 50%. It's not going to impact our cash for this year.
This is the same thing we had with the meltdown some years ago. And that's why we got out of it. Even though Florida Prime's a whole lot better. Does 50% work, or you
Well,
just think-
no, back then, it was 100% and 100%.
Right, no, I
And
know.
we
I know.
actually had the state of Florida, the Auditor General actually went through to some districts and told them they had to put money in there. It was
Well, I know he did,
requirement.
but that was illegal.
Very different situation. So what we have in there now is up to 50% of total can be in pools and no more than 25% per issuer. I don't want to change to 25% per issuer. I want to leave that as it is. But to give us the option, the only time that becomes important is when we get towards the end of the year and our total portfolio has shrunk down. And it doesn't make sense if I'm going to use money in the next 2 months. I can't put it in securities because I'm not going to get any yield pickup at all for the time and energy and work associated with buying treasuries and agencies. Typically, if I'm buying individual securities, I'm doing it 3 to 4 months out. So the only time this would be used is towards the end of the year when our cash is low, and so that I'm not keeping as much money in the bank, and I'd have the ability to put it in some pools. And we haven't bumped up against it yet. So it's also something that we could leave as it is for now and look at it again when we review it next year, and I can report back and we can get more comfortable with pools. I think at some point we're going to need to go there. And I
I
can
guess
give
my
you
problem is the difference in the pools, right? I mean, you've got
Absolutely.
this school pool that you all more or less own, but That's
The others,
a very
it
small
is.
pool.
Yeah.
And I guess it's managed by you.
Yeah, well, we're working on,
Not small anymore.
it's not small anymore, but it's not as big as Florida Prime. I doubt it ever will be as big as Florida Prime because
It's gotten larger.
FEITF is more conservative. And if people are chasing yield, they're going, or looking for that pickup, they're going to go to Florida Prime and to others because there's higher rates.
I don't make it too complicated, but I just wonder whether, could you have some sort of time restriction on it, say? It can't be more than, you can go up to 75 for 60 days or that sort of thing. Is that too complicated?
I don't know.
Complicated, okay.
Some helpful, no, I think that's helpful, because then you're not into these things forever.
Right.
Maybe it's 90 days, but do you ever have a need for that kind of money for longer than 3 months?
Probably not. Probably not. You know what I'd like,
Spend the money anyway.
we pull that money out pretty fast. So I'm just trying to figure out how we would track it to make sure we stay. I'm thinking the practical matter of how we track to
Right,
make sure
right.
we're staying in compliance.
Well,
And-
it's a certain level, right? You're
Well,
talking
you just
about a
tell them
certain
you want
level.
your money
You
back
know
on
whether
a
you
date
have
certain, you
how
know.
much you
Right.
have.
Yeah. Let me see if I can work with that and bring it back in February when we come back to our meeting.
Maybe 90 days.
I mean, the way this is going to work, once you all have approved all the policy changes, I take it into the board, there is a workshop and then 2 public hearings. It's usually 4 to 5 months before it's approved. So if we approved everything today, the earliest it would be ready is probably April or May. So it takes quite a bit of time to get these things approved. So it's not going to impact our cash for this year, really. It's looking to the future. So what we can do is for now, leave this as it is. You need to see the report that I'm going to start bringing you in February, and I think that's going to help you get more comfortable with the level of detail I'm going to be bringing you. So let me bring that in before we change this.
Okay.
And see if that gets you more comfortable. Because last year we were here and I talked about putting more money in pools, and as you know, we didn't do it because I couldn't get comfortable either. But the policy is for the future. It's not just the fact that how I'm running cash. It's how anybody else that steps into the role could be doing it. So I understand the point you're making. So let me work on that piece some more and see if I can get you comfortable with the reports that I'm generating. Let me just flip through it. I think that's pretty much the only changes that we've made are those 3 items.
Okay.
Should be it.
But I'll add the other language in regarding the supranationals and specifically mention the 3 banks that are listed. I think, yeah, this is the same changes. It's just reflective of what's in the chart.
Leanne,
Yes.
when you present this to the board in the past, have they expressed a lot of interest knowing the history of what happened? Because, I mean, we can agree on it here, but how would the board be receptive?
The school board really very strongly relies on the recommendation from the Finance Committee.
Okay.
And that's another reason why I always tell you, I really am very interested in what you have to say. Because the board members are also going to rely, they may, when this policy comes up, they may come back and watch the video of this meeting and hear the discussion. And it gives them a lot of comfort knowing we have these type of discussions. And it's perfectly fine for this committee to say, no, we don't like that recommendation. I'm very comfortable with you doing that. So we bring ideas to you, and sometimes I'm expecting they go right through because they're great ideas, and you all usually end up doing that. But there's things like this where I really want to get your feedback and hear what you have to say, and then we'll adjust the policy based on the feedback you're giving us.
Well, if you have somewhere to put the money during that time and it's 60 or 90 days,
Right.
fine, you're not
Right.
exposed as much. So
Yeah, some of the other options that are out there, just so you know what we're looking at, that is allowed by policy, is putting it into individual bank money market accounts. And the banks are all knocking on my door, and they're all offering great rates. And when I see really great rates, I get really nervous. And so, the rates, you're just not going to get really great rates. And if a bank is, and no disrespect to any individual bank, but if they're giving us a really great rate, what is that money, what are they investing in behind the scenes to get that really great rate? So I tend to ask those questions, and we haven't invested in them yet. And I look at them, I call Tallahassee, the bank's in great shape, they've got a great credit rating, very low collateral required by the state because they're in such great shape. But if they're offering 3% on a 3-month transaction, I just, something's not right. So just because it's in policy, and we're allowed to do that by policy, I can invest in those, and we're not doing it. So there's I do a lot of questioning of things too, and I tend to be very conservative, and Steve will tell you, we'll tell them no, quite frequently. But for the things we looked at today, I wanted to get feedback on it and hear what y'all had thought. Maybe I was being too conservative with it, and your all's thoughts ran right along with mine, so.
Okay. Well, I think this all points up the sophistication of our Treasury operation and our treasurer, for one, their advisors, and the members of this committee from,
We have a really good team, and
gurus to professors.
Yeah, I'm very comfortable bringing things to you, and I know you're going to tell me no if you don't think it makes sense, and that's what you're here for.
Exactly.
That's why you're here.
Well,
Okay.
they were good ideas, function just whether it's appropriate for
Exactly.
After all, we're sitting, we need this, we may need this money desperately, and we want to be sure it's there.
Right. Most of our money comes in December.
For Rick, it would be auto loans are fine, but maybe for
Yeah, right, for mine.
for the school district.
For my car.
Yeah, that's right.
Yours is rated triple C.
Okay, so I think that brings us back to the agenda. Oh, I did promise to give, there is one other policy that I want to show you. I didn't recommend any changes to the Finance Committee policy, but the board, the legal department and board office have asked me to bring to you the advisory committees to the board. They have some recommended changes, and they've asked us to bring it to each of the committees. So this is the main policy, and the Finance Committee falls underneath this. But the Finance Committee policy overrules this one in most cases. So they've asked for a couple of changes. One, it has to do, it's each member of the school board shall, instead of designate an appointee, they're going to recommend an appointment of a member as stated in the committee charter. And then the board must be provided resumes of the proposed members of the board and vote at a future board meeting whether to approve these membership appointments. So that's a change that they're making. This is actually the practice they're doing right now. They're ratifying all new appointments to committees. So this is putting it in policy what they're actually doing at this time. And again, they say they must be provided resumes of the proposed members to be voted on at the meeting. I think that was real, and they updated the links for the committee for the ethics training.
Frank.
And this is just referencing different updating links. Instead of, it's paragraph 5H instead of 4 and 5. If you have a conflict, rather than taking it to the general counsel, they're now asking you to go directly to the Commission of Ethics in Tallahassee to get a ruling and take that back to the general counsel's office. So instead of general counsel going to the ethics commission, committee members should do that themselves. That's the another change they've made. And Blair,
Can you go through that again? I'm sorry.
Blair, if I misstate this, let me know.
Yeah, that's right. In the general counsel, we can't represent you. And if you've got an ethics question, you need to get advice you can rely on, and you cannot rely on our advice because we don't represent you. So we're making it clear that you should go directly to the Commission on Ethics if you've got a question, and on their advice you can rely.
I actually had a conversation with committee member from Cork, the Construction Oversight Review Committee, who has done this, and it came up at the last meeting for Cork, and he talked about how great they were. He sent a note up to them. He got a response within 2 hours and answered his question, and he said it was a great process. So
I think our inclination would be to go to you. So maybe there should be something that says any inquiry made of you would be referred to.
And we have started that because that's what happens is we get the inquiry and we have a little response that we've prepared.
Yeah.
The Cork member was the first one out of the box.
Yeah.
That we'll send you back that says, we received your inquiry, we can't answer your question, here's the contact information for the Commission on Ethics. Their general counsel up there, as Leanne said, is a great guy. He is very responsive, and you know, he knows his stuff inside and out. It's amazing to talk with him on the phone, the way he will analyze issues.
Okay, so you have a method of dealing with it.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, and I think this is just some correcting of language, I believe. This talks about what happens. It's just fixing language, it looks like. When I read through this, I didn't see any really significant change here. And this is talking about the policies and procedures. So if there's anything that comes in, they're gonna send it to me, and I can send it to you, and it can be done with via email with attachments. So it's just how we communicate with board members. Instead of chairperson, it's chair. There's some minor changes throughout the language. I didn't see anything else significant. They did give us an option, so if materials aren't ready a week in advance, that we're getting it to you as soon as it's ready. So I appreciate that addition, because sometimes our documents are last minute related to debt issues, and I don't always have them a week in advance, and all the bankers don't necessarily want everything loaded a week in advance, because then everybody can see it. So we're typically bringing things into you at the last minute. And the quorum, it's just relying back on the committee policy, so we already have that in our policy. I think that was it. I don't know if you had any, I didn't hear any concerns with the changes they've asked for. Blair, there is a whole, it looks like there's a lot of changes here for public participation. So I guess that's so we make sure we allow people to talk during the meetings, public comments. We always have a line item for public comments in our agenda.
And they always take so much time.
Unlike our school board meetings.
Well, we sometimes ask our public to respond.
We do. Okay, so I think that was really the big changes. Again, I've given you a hard copy of these, so if you take a look at that one more quickly than the others, because I need to get comments back to the General Counsel's office pretty quick on that one policy. The other ones, if you could get me comments before we meet again in February, I'd appreciate it. And then I promised to give you a quick update, and this will be quick. There's no handout on it. We have 2 pending transactions that are out there that we have not brought to you for approval yet, but you know they're coming, and they're still coming. One is the short-term short-term financing for sales tax. We're still working on some cash flow projections there, so I do expect we're going to be bringing that to you before the end of the school year, before the end of June. We will need to get a facility in place, and most likely it's going to be a line of credit that we can draw on when needed. I'm still hoping to get some more additional information from the construction team. And then the COPS issue, we're going to postpone that until next school year, because there's one project ready to go. The others that were going to be in that transaction are just not ready yet. They're still working on what's going to be in the campus, how big it's going to be, where it's going to be. There's still a lot of questions. So my challenge there is I've got one project that is ready to go in February. I don't want to do a COPS issue for one school. It just doesn't make financial sense to do that. So that project is on the referendum list. We are going to be doing a extra meeting of the Sales Tax Oversight Committee, working to schedule that for sometime in January. Some of you are on ISOC. You'll be getting a note from me with some possible dates. The option that we have, the project is Verity Elementary, which is on the referendum project list, and we're going to fund it with COPS. But rather than do the COPS issue right now, what I'm proposing to do is do an interfund transfer between the sales tax fund and the COPS issue to get that project started. And then when we do the COPS issue, we'll put the money back in sales tax with interest. So before we do that, we'll bring it to ISOC to make sure they're comfortable. That's allowed by state law. We've done it in other places with state grants when the money doesn't come in when we expect. It's just for a matter of a few months. But because it's sales tax, I want to make sure we get that with the Sales Tax Oversight Committee.
Okay, I'll just run it through bond counsel, make sure that you get the tax aspect of that.
And we have the reimbursement agreement that you saw before. That's going to the board in January. So that's the thing we need. The work isn't going to start until February. So we'll have a reimbursement agreement in place. We thought about doing a revenue anticipation note, but it doesn't really work with the type of work that's going to be done at the beginning of the school. There's not an asset there. So we have been working with bond counsel to make sure we're doing this the best way, and this is really the best solution we've come up with. I mean, the other option is to go ahead and push forward and do a COPS issue for one school, and it just doesn't make sense financially to do that.
And what are
So-
you thinking now? This short-term sales tax is going to be a line of credit versus a note. Last time around,
Right.
we did a note and got arbitrage,
Last time we did commercial paper.
commercial paper, whatever.
And we had an underlying letter of credit.
Right.
But the way we did the arbitrage on that is we went ahead and borrowed the full $300 million, and were able to spend that within the arbitrage spend-down requirement. And I just don't know that that would happen this time. The projects are taking longer. They're not moving quite as fast as we thought they were going to right now. They're picking up. There's a tremendous amount of work being done, but the sales tax is all the deferred maintenance projects. They're very complex. It's not like a new school where we can get started, here we go, and then you've got the, we know exactly what the cash flows are going to be on those new schools. When it's deferred maintenance, every project is taking 2 years. It's 2 summers because they can't do it during the school year. When it's a new school, the kids are in one school, we're building a brand new campus, and the contractors can go nonstop and overnight and weekends if they need to. These deferred maintenance are on existing campuses where kids are there. So a lot of work is being done at night and on weekends and winter break and spring break and summer break, and they're taking 2 to 3 years to get the work done. So that makes it really hard to meet the spend down requirement for arbitrage. Okay. So as much as I'd love to go there and try to do it, it's just the nature of the work. I don't think it's going to happen.
Okay.
So that's why we're looking at the line of credit and just draw what we need to. So we get the facility in place. I don't expect we'll need to draw right away. So that's the other thing we're looking at with the line of credit. There's always a fee just to have the credit available. So we're looking at different options of how to structure that. But we have to have something in place in order to have the budget in line for projects to start. So it's almost a chicken and the egg type of thing. I've got to get that in place in order for the work to be done, in order for them to spend it. So we'll have to do something, and we're just working on the best solution. And we'll be bringing that. I'm hoping to have that to you at the February or April meeting. I'd like to do it in February, just whether or not we can get all the data we need in place.
Good enough.
Okay? And I think the only other thing I need to mention to you is point on the back page, we have the future meetings. The next one is February 22nd. And I'm being optimistic to say the new COPS issue and sales tax finance will be on there. It may be shifted to April, but these are the future meetings. The room is reserved, and I'll probably this afternoon go ahead and send calendar items out. I don't think I've sent these out to you yet. So we'll send those out, but you have a hard copy of them. We actually have the dates set up for all of 2020 as well and halfway through 2021. This room is hard to get, so I've blocked it off 2 years in advance. So if you are interested in going out longer than 1 year, let me know, and I'll be happy to give you those dates as well.
So
Have
all
these-
set then?
Have
We
these
ready?
changed, Leanne?
No.
Excuse me, Rick.
No, they have not
Good,
changed.
thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, Rick.
Well, wishing you
That's-
all
that's
happy
all I
holidays.
have. Thank
We
you
have anything
again.
else?
No, thank you again for all your work and your comments today. We really
Merry
appreciate
Christmas
it.
to you. Anybody else? Any comments? With that, we're adjourned.
Okay. Thank you very much.